Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Clock, ready to go?
It's time to go.
All right, welcome, everyone.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Jim Stritzinger, the director of the Broadband Office, and we're here with the team from our consulting team called Guidehouse that's with us today to lead the bulk of this webinar. We're excited to have them here in town. We'll welcome them all to Columbia, South Carolina, and we hope this is a very informational exercise for everybody to go through this webinar. We will, with regard to questions, just some housekeeping rules. We're going to ask that everybody types their questions into the chat window. We're going to be paying attention to those questions along the way. If we have time at the end, we will take verbal questions, but we're going to try to get them all captured. And the Guidehouse team has offered to get written answers to the questions, and we'll get them posted as they come up. So with that, I'm going to, reminding everybody this session will be recorded. And so any questions or dialogue that's happening will be made available to all participants in the ARPA grant program and at this point forward. So Carolyn, the show is yours.
Thank you, Jim. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Carolyn. I'm with Guidehouse. I have a team of, our team is behind us here, along with the team from the Broadband Office, and we are really pleased to be here today to talk about really the essentials of what you're going to need to understand about the federal requirements related to the funds that are coming out for the this round of ARPA broadband funding. We want to make sure that the ISPs, who will be the ultimate contractors for these funds, have really the what and why of these regulations, and then the subsequent, the following reporting requirements that are coming from those requirements. There we go. So we have two purposes of the presentation today. So we want to make sure that you see the depth and breadth of the federal regulations related to the American Rescue Plan Act, state and local fiscal recovery funds. Following from that, there are the federal reporting requirements for contractors. How you're going to report on those things are going to be provisions of the contract that you have with the Broadband Office. And so as you think about your questions, we want all of those questions. We want the questions that you have about how's my contract going to run, why this requirement, we want them all. What we'll try to answer today for you is that what and why. And then we will be following up likely on some of those how questions if they really are very contract specific or very project specific. I'm hesitant to give really detailed answers without knowing the details of your project during this webinar. So I'm hoping that you take the time to ask, as Jim had mentioned in the chat, as they come up during the presentation, and then we'll group them together and answer them as best we can. And then we will provide written materials for anybody who participated in this webinar as a follow-up so that you have those as you're executing your contracts and get everything in order to start the work that you're planning to do. So we're going to do a quick overview of ARPA and SLFRF just so you have the broadest base. I know that before you applied for these funds, you read every single rule related to ARPA and SLFRF. So we're just going to do a quick review of those. From that are the reporting requirements. And those are really the two big pieces that are going to be the burden for you all as you think about this project and all of the bits and pieces that you'll need to submit to the Broadband Office to ultimately get your payments for this investment that you're going to make. The federal contracting rules, we just wanted to give a high-level overview of those, as those are a lot of questions that we've been getting. And then specifically some of the provisions that are in the state and local fiscal recovery fund or in the ARPA rules, so that you get a sense of why we're asking for this reporting. And then there is that affordable connectivity program. There've been some questions about that. And then your bonds. I want to make sure you know exactly what you're supposed to have so that you can really go from grant award to notice to proceed really smoothly. So which laws apply and why is this so complex? So you'll all remember that the American Rescue Plan Act was passed basically these funds said, we want to put federal money into all of state and local governments so that they have an ability to respond to the pandemic and then recover from the pandemic. And so one of the areas that they cared about was investment and access to broadband, which is why we're here today. But the state and local fiscal recovery funds are the overall, the $350 billion that was allocated directly to states and local governments to fund investments like the broadband investments that you all are proposing to do. So the broadband investments, there are very specific requirements from the state and local fiscal recovery fund program, the final rule and the FAQ that follow from that program. But in addition to that, you've got some state rules that are controlling and regulating why the broadband office is doing the program the way that they are. And so they had to create a very specific account that could only be used for broadband. And then you are participating in one very specific broadband grant program that gets us to where we are today. So you may be participating in these programs in other states or in local, for local governments throughout South Carolina, and it could be a little bit different because of the ARPA broadband account and the ARPA broadband grant program that you're participating in. But regardless, all of the American Rescue Plan Act and then the state and local fiscal recovery fund rules apply. Those rules are evolving. And so right now we're presenting the state and local fiscal recovery guidance based on what's been provided to us, to all of us, by Treasury today. And we know that for broadband, as you all know, better than we do, probably being that's what you do, there are decisions and new information and new regulations and new recommendations that come out about how we need to report and what we need to do and for broadband investments. And so we're going to make sure that as soon as we see updated guidance from Treasury, we're immediately getting that to the team here at the broadband office and then getting that out to you so that if there are any changes in reporting, we're making that available right away. And we are, though, one of the advantages of having Guidehouse as part of this is we're looking to streamline that reporting for you and for the broadband office any chance that we can get. So which regulations apply beyond saying what's ARPA funds or SLFRF funds? So you have the authorizing legislation, which we just talked about. One of the things that is unique to this grant program coming out of the broadband office is that all of the federal regulations apply to this money. So up until now, you may have been working with state money and we had state regulations that apply. And some of the procurement rules and some of the reporting rules are coming from the 2 CFR 200 or uniform guidance. Then we have the state and local government regulations. So a lot of times what we're seeing throughout the state and fiscal recovery rules is they say, we don't have anything specific, but you need to follow the local rules. And that's one of the reasons that the broadband office is contracting with you. So because you're the one who knows the local regulations in the communities that you're working with and know how to get your permits and get everything in order before you're doing the work. For the state and local fiscal recovery funds, there's the final rule. And it's probably a good thing to save in your toolbar at the top of your internet browser that you have on your computer, the final rule, and then there's an FAQ that was published in August. Both of these places is where you can do a quick find for broadband, quick find for speed test, and you'll be able to see the guidance that we're referencing throughout this presentation. These are the places, specifically the final rule and the FAQs of where we're seeing updates and upgrades and additional information and guidance on how to report. Your contract with ORS, though, is probably the most important thing. And that is where all of those rules and regulations that you're seeing on this screen are really are codified. And that's a lot of the how you're going to report, when you're going to report, all of the details and the forms and the information, the specific information that the broadband office is going to need to report. And then any updates to uniform guidance or anything that would come out related to federal regulations. If they're new or updated during the course of this program, they're going to apply to this project, they're going to apply to your project. You'll remember that these are funds that have to be spent out by December 31st, 2026. And so a lot of these rules and regulations are put in place to really make sure that the projects that we fund or the projects that are awarded from the broadband office are able to be executed in that time. We don't want to see a project that is going to take 7 years to build out be funded with these dollars, because we'd be setting you up for failure. So these are all of the places that you should have saved somewhere and easy to go back to. And if there are questions about any of the contract rules that apply to you or apply to your subcontractors, you are going back to the to uniform guidance and to CFR 200. Oh, so how do we determine which ones apply? So I talked about this a little bit, but ORS they are the recipient of these funds. And so whenever you're looking at federal guidance, there's the US Treasury, which is the funder, and then there's the recipient of these funds. As contractors, you are essentially a type of subrecipient to ORS. And what you're seeing here is that the obligation that ORS has to determine the investments and the awards and to award the projects, right? So you saw they defined the grant program, and they are the ones who are ultimately determining which proposals are granted as projects and then put out as contracts. They're going to make sure that you are complying with every step of this process. So that is their promise to the Treasury, that they are going to only fund projects that meet the eligibility requirements, and that these projects are able to meet all of the compliance requirements as we go through. They are obligated to submit reports quarterly. So in a calendar year, there's 4 quarters. The first quarter of the year is January through March. They're required to report by April, and it goes from there. So any of the reports that you're required to submit to ORS and the timing of those reports is based on the requirements that ORS has to the Treasury. So these are not dates that they picked out of thin air, and they are not dates that really can move very much in terms of reporting. So they're pretty hard deadlines, and they are based on the fact that Treasury wants information about how these projects progress as they're underway. They're going to so then you all as the contractors, you're agreeing to adhere to all of these requirements. That's pretty simple. You're going to impose these conditions on your subcontractors. So for instance, if there is a requirement to report what you paid to your laborers and your mechanics, ORS needs to know what you paid and what your subcontractors paid. So many of the provisions that you're going to see in your contract with ORS will have to carry down to your subcontractor contracts, and that's a federal requirement. This is not something that ORS is choosing to do. It's not something Guidehouse is choosing to do, but that is that flow of your subcontractors, making sure that they are also following federal requirements. You're going to submit your reporting, and the big piece is that you have to maintain pretty much every document that you used to support your invoice or to support your progress report, you need to hold on to. And you need to hold on to it until December 2031. So your project's going to end in December 2026, and then you've got 5 years that those documents need to be accessible either to ORS or directly to someone from the US Treasury if they decide that this is a project that needs to be audited. So what are the reporting requirements? So as you were looking through the contracts and seeing all the exhibits, the numerous exhibits that are in the contract with ORS, this is why they're asking you for all of those exhibits. So for every project, we need to understand what you're going to do. We need to understand the timing of when you expect to start your construction, end your construction, have your all of your locations be live. And we need to know the location of that project. So some of the projects will be in one county, some of them will be in several counties. So some of the very specific information that the Treasury wants to know is around location. And if some of it may, we've never had to report it like this before. Why do we care about which or what? So some of the reasons that ORS decided to ask for all of their reporting by census block was so that they could be sure, regardless of what the Treasury, if any Treasury guidance changes or evolves, having that information at the census block level allows them to have the finest grain, the finest level of information so it can be reported in multiple ways. Broadband projects have the most reporting requirements of any other types of projects that are allowed to be funded with the state and local fiscal recovery funds. They care about locations, they care about the technology you're using, and the speed tests are absolutely required. And so you do see the US Treasury mimicking what's going on with broadband generally, around really making sure that we have all of the information to really make sure that when everything goes live, those households and businesses can depend on the service at that speed all the time, to really make sure that this was a fully developed and fully completed project as the grant funds go out the door. Project completeness is something that comes from the Treasury. So they want to know when your project starts, when your project is in process, there's two things that they care about. They're going to care about whether it's less than 50% complete or more than 50% complete. So that maybe seem like a sort of strange status requirement, but it's coming from them in terms, I think what they're trying to track is, are the funds going out at the same rate that the projects being built out? And then once projects are completed, for broadband projects, it does trigger a whole series of reporting. So what will happen when your projects are just getting started, you get your notice to proceed, you're in not started or less than 50% complete status, and then there are reporting requirements associated with those statuses. And then there are reporting requirements associated with completed projects. And so some of the information that you're being asked for, you're going to say, well, I can't report that yet. I don't even know. I haven't started yet. I don't know what these wages are going to be. I don't know exactly how many people I'll have working on the project. So not every single reporting record is required at every single status. And so one of the things that we hope to get out of this webinar is that as you ask these questions, we're going to be looking for ways that we can make what needs to be reported when a little bit more clear, so that you have no problem providing the information that we'll need. And then we need to know about every single expenditure. And for your projects, you're going to be keeping track of those expenditures and then getting paid at the end. And so these projects then are a little bit different than what you might be seeing in terms of water and sewer projects, stormwater projects, or any kind of project where they're making progress payments. We'll be reporting all of the expenditures. So what the Treasury cares about is not necessarily the contractor expenditure. The Treasury wants us to report on ORS's expenditure. And so they don't report that expenditure until they make a payment to you at the end. And then annually, that's a quarterly report. So that's why you're being asked to provide that information every 3 or 4 months, so that the ORS can report to Treasury as they're required. Annually, it's a more narrative report that the Treasury is asking for. If you've done any searching and you've looked at maybe North Carolina's report, or if you've looked at Utah's report, if you've looked at any other state report, you may see there are these very specific sections that each state is required to report on. These may or may not feel like they have anything to do with your project. And so they are general provisions that the state of South Carolina needs to tell the US Treasury about for all the entire investment of SLFRF funds in the state. And so there will be parts of your project, pieces of your project description, maybe you in a particular, for one particular project, does really talk very well about community benefit or very well about community engagement. And those will be some projects that may get highlighted, or we may follow up with you for additional information on, so that we can meet this annual reporting requirement. So you are providing direct information to ORS so they can absolutely report their quarterly reporting requirements. Most of the information that you're providing in your project description and how quickly you're completing projects are going to fall into the annual report. And then there may be instances where your projects are highlighted or aspects of your project are of interest to us or to the General Assembly for the state of South Carolina, and we may be following up with you, or ORS may be following up with you, so that we can get additional information on those specific provisions. So this is definitely the root of all of those exhibits that are in your contract are coming from these reporting requirements. So what happens for you guys specifically? So you're required to meet them all, whether you think that they are a good thing to report on or not. These are not, these are the most relevant or these are the most appropriate to our project. These are all the reporting requirements. And they are by virtue of you agreeing to participate into this program, you're agreeing to all of them. And so really having eyeballs on what they all are is what we want to make sure that you have. There's two specific documents. If you haven't been there yet, you need to go. The first is the compliance and reporting guidance. And then there's a user guide. And both of these places will talk about broadband projects. Generally, this is where we are getting the technology requirement, the speed test requirement, this terminology of pre-investment and post-investment is coming directly from that guidance. And so there are things that look like they may be your responsibility to report, but they are in fact ORS's responsibility to report. So the pre-investment information on any location where you are proposing to install broadband, those are ORS's obligations. They designed the program to put broadband in places where there was none or was very little. And so in those cases, the pre-investment report, the pre-investment records that are required by Treasury will come from either the maps that they've prepared or some combination of work that we do with them in the background as we're getting your project starting in the reporting portal for the Treasury. So you don't necessarily need to say, well, I don't know what the pretest was, or I don't know. These are things that are coming from ORS. But as soon as you deploy your technology, that's when we need to start telling the Treasury where it is and how fast the speed is and when it came online. A little bit more on the detail of what is exactly going to be reported for your project. And we wanted you to see this for a couple of reasons. One, so you would understand all the provisions of your contract and you could see why we're asking the questions the way that we are, but also so that you'll see what we will be reporting on your project. So there's two pieces of this. What are you going to, why do you need to give it to us? And then no surprises on what might be reported about your project. But you can see in some of these cells here that they're asking for planned versus actual. And so you come into your project, you make the proposal to ORS and the broadband office, and you say, well, our plan is that we're going to do X number of locations. We want these speeds. This is the technology that we plan to do. And then you get into the field and maybe it looks slightly different. And not because you tried to pretend that you were going to do something that you couldn't, but the reality is that's not how the project built out. And so when we get into the project, we're starting a project or we're less than 50% built, we are going to be reporting on planned locations and planned miles of fiber. We're going to have estimates of what we think the total number of miles of fiber will be. what the cost per location, what the cost per house. These will all be based on the project you are planning to build. As we move to a 50% complete, more than 50% complete and completed projects, these will get updated. So the way that the Treasury is asking you for this information and the way that we understand is expected is that we're gonna have a plan and we're gonna have an actual. And most times it's gonna match up. It's not gonna be a problem. But there will be places where, oh, well, what we were actually able to build was more than what we thought. Well, some cases there will be a little bit different than what we thought was gonna be able to be built. So we wanted to show everybody this so that you could see that the plan and actual are two different sort of phases of how we're asking you to report this information. And that is based on how much of your projects you've completed. And so you may not know the total number of fire. You may not know the total cost per mile. You know, we think it's going to be going in. That's what we'll report. And then as you're building out, we'll provide updated information. So we wanted to talk a little bit about how, without getting into the very specific details about each project and your contract, where we, and we also wanted to sort of set some minds at ease about, you know, what is reality in terms of what you'll have, what information you'll have about your project at which phase of your project. So when we start your project, you get your notice to proceed. We are just going to have the basic description of what you expect to invest. And then that's all we need. I mean, that's what we want to tell the Treasury. That's how we're matching up we plan to do X amount of locations and Y amount of households. And we expect that, and we want a contract for a certain amount of money to do that. So you're just making sure that the investment and the dollar amount are in scope at that stage. Once construction starts, there is additional reporting really related to the laborers and mechanics that are out in the field. You can't report on wages you haven't paid yet, and you can't report that people have been on a construction site that you haven't initiated yet. So we recognize that there are some provisions and some reporting metrics that can only happen once construction starts. And so even what the Treasury asks for is you have a project start date and you have an anticipated construction start date. Once we trigger that anticipated or that construction start date, then the Treasury is expecting additional reporting depending on the size of your contract. At the end of the project, that's when we need everything. What happened? How did we go? How did it go? What speeds are we seeing? And did all of the locations come online the way that you anticipated that they would? And all of those things are what's going to determine that your contract has been met for ORS, and that's when you'll get your payment. And then ad hoc reporting as required. So this is a little bit of that annual reporting that we talked about ahead of time, but also is a nod to the fact that the Treasury can ask for anything it wants. And we don't expect anything that's wild based on the guidance that we've determined or that we've seen at this point. And really what we're seeing as Treasury rolls out their guidance, more refinement, not necessarily new requirements. So at one point we knew we had to report locations, and then we knew that we had a couple of different ways that we could report location. And initially we knew we needed to do speed tests, and then they give us more information about how and when those can be reported. So what we really expect is a refinement to the reporting, not necessarily new reporting, but this also alludes to some of that annual reporting. At this point, the guidance we've received from Treasury really outlines the total amount or all of the components that need to be part of that annual performance plan. But there is a chance that additional questions or additional detail could be required for those annual plans. And so we want to have some space in our relationship with ORS and then ORS's relationship with you so that we can anticipate or provide for those additional details if they're requested. So we've gotten a lot of questions about which one, get right to, this is gonna lead right into the question that we just got in the chat. What applies and what doesn't apply? So you're saying we have to follow 2 CFR 200. Does that mean every federal requirement applies? What applies, what doesn't apply? What, and how do we report that? So the next couple of slides, we're gonna try to take you through that. This is probably the most intricate part of what we've seen so far in terms of broadband projects and any infrastructure project, especially the larger ones. So we're going to do our best here to provide the guidance that we know about as we understand it and as we understand your projects. This is probably the place where you will see the most follow-up questions. So don't hesitate. This is a great place to throw some stuff in the chat. And if there are very specific project questions, we want to address them. But we're going to need a little bit of time to make sure that we get you exactly the guidance that you need for your specific project. So if it feels like we're not hitting it yet, that is on purpose because we wanted to create some space for those very specific questions. So we're going to do our best to answer them all, and we will follow up if anything doesn't get answered. So the first one is around the Davis-Bacon Act. So if this project is solely funded with state and local fiscal recovery funds, so your contract between you as an ISP and the Office of Regulatory Staff, Broadband Office, the only funds that are going to be in that contract are going to be ARPA funds, that's state and local fiscal recovery funds. So if that is the case, certifying Davis-Bacon is not required. So the process that you may be familiar with for really large construction projects in other states or even for the federal government, that certification, the WH347, 347, and the compliance forms are not required for your contract with state and local recovery funds with ORS. So Davis-Bacon certifies Davis-Bacon, and the way that you may be familiar doing it for these contracts is not required. That doesn't get you out of reporting on some of your labor and your wages, so hang on there. Although the Treasury guidance says you do not have to follow and certify Davis-Bacon, they are interested in what's happening regarding the labor on your project. So there are wage and labor reporting requirements that are required for any project, any contract that you have, the ISP has with ORS that's greater than 10 million. So in many cases, what will happen is you're going to have a $17 million project, but the award that you're getting or the contract amount that you're getting from ORS may be $9 million. So that is a $9 million, as far as the Treasury is concerned, that's a $9 million project. So we're not going to trigger them here. But if it's an overall $21 million project and the award that you get from ORS is 10.2 million, you are going to trigger a requirement to report your wages and your labor. Now, you can certify Davis-Bacon here. I mean, if your practice or your subcontractor's practice is to certify Davis-Bacon, you can do that. There is an allowance when you report the project to the Treasury. We check a box. We say, yep, we're certified as Davis-Bacon. And what that is obligating you as the contractor to keep all of the records and all of the required documentation, all the inspections, all of the paychecks, all the compliance reports that you would keep for Davis-Bacon. You've got to hold on to those and keep them for this project. If you don't want to do certified Davis-Bacon, then you have to supply some wage and labor information for your project. So in this case, you have a contract with ORS that is greater than $10 million. So $10 million, $10.1 million, $14 million, your contract, the actual dollars that you're getting in state and local fiscal recovery funds, you've got two options. And the labor and reporting, the labor and wage standard I'm going to talk about in a little bit. So, but it really, this is the $10 million trigger. And it's not the total project cost. It is the total contract amount that you have with broadband office. And I think this, I just saw this and I realized I didn't say it, but these are definitely the provisions that you're sending down to your subcontractors. So the Treasury does care about what the laborers and the mechanics that you have working for you on the project, and if any of your subcontractors have individuals who are in those job class categories, they would also have to be reported because your contract with ORS is greater than 10 million. Now, if you have an $11 million project and 6 million is coming from the broadband office, you don't have any labor and wage requirements to report. So anything that's smaller than 10 million in your contract with ORS does not trigger any of the labor and wage standard, wage and labor standard reporting requirements. Let's do some examples. I talked about them a little bit, but we'll walk through them more specific. So you've got a $9.5 million total project. So everything that you are going to do for your project will be 9.5 million, but you've got quite a bit of money. 2.5 million of that project is going to come from your funding, and only 7 million is coming in your contract with the broadband office. So you only have $7 million in state and local fiscal recovery funds. The wage and labor information is not required for your project. You have a $24 million project, so you have a big project. But most of this is funded with your own funding. And it's only a $9 million contract with the broadband office. So only $9 million of state and local fiscal recovery funds are coming into your project. No wage and labor information is required for your project. Here's a big one though. So it's an $18 million project, and you've been awarded an $11 million contract from ORS broadband office. You have two options. The simpler one, this really depends on your internal business processes, is that you need to provide information in these 4 puzzle pieces as soon as your construction project starts. So as soon as you start, so you kick off, your construction starts in June. The first time you pay paychecks to your laborers and your mechanics is the 1st of July. So starting with that first time that you're asked to report to ORS after that July paycheck, you need to start providing this information to your to ORS. So they want to know the total number of employees for you and for your subcontractors who are working on the project. They care that if they work for you, they work for your company, or they work for your subcontractors. And they also want to know if you've hired them from a third party. So you may have 100 people on the project. 92 of them may work directly, be getting a paycheck from you or from your subcontractor. And 8 you needed for a couple of days, and you hired them through a leasing company to come work on your project. They want to know about all of those employees. And then they want to know the wages and the benefits that were paid to those employees by their classification. And so that it's a little bit like Davis-Bacon in terms of the fact that you're saying these are the total number of employees I had by job category, and these are the wages and the benefits that I paid them. But you're not certifying. There's not it doesn't fall you into or drop you into all of the inspections and those types of requirements. And then they want to know whether the wages that you're paying to those 100 employees that I just referenced are prevailing wages. The Treasury just asks yes or no. Our understanding of what's really going on in the market is that the likelihood that prevailing wages are being paid on these construction projects is pretty good. But there's no requirement that you pay prevailing wage. There's just a request for the information to tell us whether or not you're paying prevailing wage. And this is Exhibit N, if you've seen it in your contract. We're looking for opportunities to improve that to make it a little bit easier for you to report that information in Exhibit N. But the purpose really here is US Treasury is interested and they want to know if you are finding the contractors and employees or workers, laborers that you need for your project and the wages that are having to be paid to be able to maintain the workforce that you need on that project. And so they tried to make the reporting requirement a little less burdensome. May have wound up making it a little bit confusing. And so this is the best way that we can describe it to you. As you're thinking about how you want to report this or what this reporting looks like or what the form and actual information that you're sharing with ORS, those are some decisions that we have a little bit of room to make as we finalize your contracts and really get a full picture of how you're going to build out and when you'll have these employees on your project. The other option is to certify Davis-Bacon. So if it's an $11 million contract and your internal business process would be to certify Davis-Bacon, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. But that is not a requirement for this $11 million contract with SLFRF funds. So then there's these two, when you've read the final rule and you read the facts that have been published, there's a request and an interest that Buy America might be something that's considered in your project, but it is not required. So similar to the Davis-Bacon question, any contract that you have with the broadband office that is 100% funded with state and local fiscal recovery funds, you are not subject to the Build America, Buy America provision. You are also not subject to NEPA. But you do have to follow all the other environmental, state and local environmental and permitting laws for your project. So less of a burden, no NEPA, not worried about Buy America, Build America, Buy America, but definitely on the Build America, Buy America, those tend to be some of the questions that may come up in some of the narrative responses. So we'll be looking for opportunities to understand how you procured, your supplies and your labor for these projects, but these provisions do not apply to your projects. And then this is sort of just a reiteration of what you're already doing every day. But as soon as you're using federal funds, no discrimination. And so these are the exact provisions that you are agreeing to abide by. And your contract these provisions are called out in the agreement that the state of South Carolina signed with the US Treasury, and then therefore need to be conveyed into your contracts and then conveyed into the contracts you have with your subcontractors. So we just wanted to put some daylight on the what you are agreeing to when you sign these contracts, which I suspect in most cases this is your general practice, but didn't want to miss the opportunity to bring this to your attention. So environmental permitting, I touched on this a little bit, and I think this is one of the reasons that you're being hired as a contractor, is these communities that you're working in, and which permits and which regulations you need to comply with. So an example might be in one community, you need to get a right-of-way permit. In another community, you need to get a traffic plan permit, but you're required to do all of those things, depending on the location, depending on where you're building, and any kind of local laws around, working in the rights of way, working on privately owned land, all those types of things absolutely apply to these funds, and I guess this could be a place where you might get tripped up, is that if you didn't know about a local permit or a local permitting or local law that you weren't following, that could put your funding in jeopardy if there was not a way to cure that. So follow every rule. get your permits ahead of time. And you can be asked by ORS or by the Treasury for proof that you followed all of these laws and obtained all of the permits that are required. Debarment and contractors in good standing is another place where we've got quite a few questions. So we highlighted this here. So this really is, there is an absolute rule with federal funds that federal funds cannot be paid to a contractor or a subcontractor who has been debarred. So they've done something, they've used funds illegally, they've fraudulently reported on funds, anything that you could think that would get you into trouble with the use of federal funds. There's two kind of gates, if you will, the first one for ORS and the second one for you. So the first one for ORS is that they have to require that you're registered in SAM.gov. As you know, you've registered in SAM.gov. You cannot register in SAM.gov if you've been debarred and you're not in good standing. So you have to have that unique entity identifier. This is absolutely like when we report your project in the US Treasury reporting portal, it won't let us get through if you don't have your UEI. And so that is definitely a stop for the reporting portal. So, and the reason for this is because you are certified that you're going to use these funds. You're a responsible company. You know how to use these funds, and you're going to use them to the letter of the law, both on the federal side, the state side, and the local side to get your project done. When you hire your subcontractors, you as the contractor are obligated to assure, you're certifying that every subcontractor you hire is also in good standing. So there is a place, you're probably all familiar with it, but we wanted to make sure you had it, on the Department of Labor website, where you can check lists for entities that have been debarred or are not in good standing. So you can do this a couple different ways. You can check the list. You can have your contractors certified. And this is a place where we are monitoring, well, ORS is monitoring you, we are monitoring ORS to make sure that we have, as I talked about, the UEI for every contractor, and that you have this provision in all of your subcontracts, and that you have done the check to make sure not only that they've not been debarred, but that this is a contractor that you can trust to use your funds well and get the job done in the time and in the manner that you have dictated in their contract. Affordable connectivity program is another layer. So this is definitely a provision of the state and local fiscal recovery funds because, well, there's not a lot of reason to put really good internet out there if households who need the internet can't afford to connect to it. But there's like the labor requirements, there's an either or option here. And so we wanted to talk through this with you. So the easy one is that you are an ISP that has an approved affordable connectivity program. And the affordable connectivity program really says that we're providing discounts for households that otherwise could not afford to connect to the service. They can be one-time discounts, they can be ongoing discounts, but your program, your affordable connectivity program has met the provisions and the qualifications that are needed that have been set by the FCC for your affordable connectivity program. If you don't have an affordable connectivity program or it hasn't been certified or hasn't been qualified or registered, you're able to do it another way. You're saying, no, our program hasn't been certified or met the requirements or been registered with the FCC, but we do have one. And so if you can't check the box that says we have the ACP, you can in narrative form tell ORS, and then we'll tell the Treasury about your program. Ideally, it's a program that largely meets the same qualifications, or may meet different qualifications, because of the nature of the environment or the location that you're working in, or you may have a different mix of types of location. Maybe there are businesses and schools, there aren't households. So there may be reasons that you don't necessarily have this program. And in that case, you're not excluded from getting these funds and building out the service that's needed throughout the state of South Carolina. We just want to know a little bit about how you are making sure that the broadest range of households in the location that you're building has access to that really fast speed that you just brought in.
Actually, Carolyn, a quick, we actually do require ACP participation in South Carolina to be an eligible applicant, so.
Okay, so that'll be easier. But it is thank you, Jim, because it is a confusing part of the guidance when you read it, like how do I know what to use or what not to use? So, and this is a case where, it's a great example, where you're imposing something that's different or more stringent than what the federal fundings require. And then the bonding requires another place that we've got some questions. Gotta have a bond. So the way this works, so typically when it's federal money, the federal government cares that you're protecting the federal interest. In this case, we know that the federal interest has been met or been covered. And so it really falls to ORS's bonding requirements. And in this case, ORS is going to require a bond for every project. What their plan is that at notice to proceed, it will be contingent upon you as the ISP providing proof of that bond. And that bond will stay in place throughout the duration of the project. And then at project completion, you'll be good to go. So you may be participating in other projects in other states where the bonding requirement may be different, but this is the one that is being imposed by ORS for the projects we're talking about here. So the recap is pretty good. I don't know how we're doing on questions or time. I haven't even given 10. Oh, okay, well, great. So I have 10 minutes to reiterate everything. Just kidding. So I think we didn't mean to oversimplify this checklist, but really just making sure that you start at the top. That you're recognizing that these are very specific funds. The Treasury tried to remove as much red tape and strings so that we could really streamline awards of these funds and get investments in communities before December 2026. The reporting requirements that we talked about today are the best that we know at this point. And so they are conveyed from Treasury down to ORS and then being conveyed to you in your contract, and then some of which are conveyed to your subcontractors in their contract. The two timing to remember is there's a quarterly reporting and annual reporting. The quarterly reporting will be pretty standard once you get into it, but the annual reporting may provoke us or ORS to follow up with any one of you for additional details about your project. We talked about the federal contracting rules that apply and don't apply. The most complex one is really the Davis-Bacon. So we'll be more than happy to continue to ask questions about the fact that Davis-Bacon is not required, but you do have the other labor standards. And then Build America, Buy America doesn't apply. NEPA does not apply. Your unique identifier, UEI, your unique identifying number, we do need to have. And then although you could choose to get those from your subcontractors, but really we just want to make sure that they're in good standing. You're required to be part of the Affordable Connectivity Program, and then you are going to be required to hold a bond in order to get notice to proceed. So for questions. So how do we want to thank you, everyone?
Carter, do you have good visibility on the chat?
I do.
Okay.
So Carolyn, the first question was, will ISPs have to do an individual audit report by legal entity that receives funding?
I will get back to you on that question. I think it's because we want to see, I want to know the details of those legal entities, how it's being contracted, and the size of those projects to make sure that I'm not making up what you're triggering or not triggering. So this will be one that you will see in the follow-up questions, but good one. Thank you for that one.
Next question is, based on our reading of the Treasury and state materials, the state of South Carolina would be the subrecipient and any grant awarded broadband providers would be beneficiaries. Can you confirm that is correct?
So I understand that, I understand why that might be the read. So what we have is that, what we've determined is that the Office of Regulatory Staff, so ORS, is in fact the recipient of the funds. So as an agency of the state of South Carolina, they are acting on behalf of the state of South Carolina and are the recipient of the funds. And therefore, they have three options. They can have beneficiaries, they can have subrecipients, and they can have contractors. Due to the nature of how ORS wanted these projects to play out, and due to the nature of how the internet service providers operate in the market, we needed you to be contractors. Because that allows you to earn a profit on the work that you do, and that allows you to have a contract that says you're going to do this very specific thing. And so in fact, the relationship that we've established and confirmed in terms of all of the guidance and what's happening across the country is the Office of Regulatory Staff is the recipient as an agent of the state of South Carolina, and the ISP is a contractor. And that relationship is established by means of your contract that you are signing. And so I understand the question about beneficiary. I will talk just a little bit about that so that you understand the difference there. So in general, what the Treasury has allowed around beneficiaries is that I as the individual household or my individual business has determined that there was a negative impact imposed to my household or to my business due to the pandemic. And so I proved that I had a loss of income, or I proved that I had a loss of revenue, or I proved that I was not able to pay my rent because of a COVID disruption in income, and I therefore qualify for that benefit, for that cash handout, right? And then I get that cash handout, and there's no further reporting for the household or the business because the criteria has been met by a means test essentially. And that's not the case for the ISPs. The ISPs are saying, we want to build this infrastructure for you. It's going to cost us this amount of money. We're willing to enter into a contract with you to build that infrastructure. So it's not a means test, which is generally what is creating households or individuals to fall into that beneficiary category. Is there any add on that? Okay.
I think we probably have time for one more.
Okay.
We're at
Let's do one
3
more.
minutes left. Yep.
So there were three questions on bonding, so I'll combine them. Is the bond amount for the full project amount? And can the cost of bond be paid with SLFRF funds?
So this is going to be an ORS determination on how much they want the bond for, and whether or not they're going to let your grant cover it. So what we're looking for is if it's a $10 million contract, I'm going to use a smaller amount. If it's an $8 million contract, you have a relationship with ORS to determine what the right bonding amount is for that $8 million contract. And then these costs could be determined to be SLFRF eligible, but it's really up to ORS to determine if they're going to let them be eligible for their grants. So that is an ORS determination. And so we'll make sure that that's really clear in the bonding requirement for your project, unless Jim's ready to answer that.
We'll get back to you on that one. And then I guess, you know what, you're pretty good on that one. Do you do one more?
I'm happy to do one more, but
Do
that's
one
helpful.
more and then we'll call it quits.
Okay.
Do you have to have a competitive bidding process for materials and supplies?
So the advantage that you have to be a contractor to the ORS is for these projects is that you get to follow all of the processes that you normally would as you would bid any project. So the advantage of being a contractor is that competitive, those 2 CFR requirements around competitive bids and getting 3 bids, and those types of things do not apply to how you're doing your subcontracting, your materials and services, your equipment. So if you need a subcontract for electricians, you do not have to go get 3 bids to prove to ORS that you hired the best electrician. You get to follow your own subcontracting process that you would to find the electricians that you know you need to get your job done, because you've already agreed on a price with ORS. So the contract really protects you in terms of exactly what you're going to build and how much you're going to get for that build. And so all of your materials and services, all of your equipment that you're going to rent, all of the employees that you're going to pay, you've already guaranteed that cost to ORS through your contract, and you do not need to prove to anyone that you went out and got 3 bids, 8 bids to prove that you chose the lowest cost option. You're not required to choose the lowest cost option. You're required to get the infrastructure built in the cost, or for the cost, and in the time that you promised to ORS.
Carolyn, Team Guidehouse, thank you all for being here, especially in Columbia, South Carolina on a nice warm day.
Yeah.
But, and to all the ISPs and everybody that joined us on the call, we thank you all for joining us. We're excited to work with everybody, and we'll figure this out together. And as we work on closing the digital divide in South Carolina. So
So exciting.
yeah.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. We'll answer your questions. Thank
Yep.
you.